Hey everybody, how you doing? Tinker's Workshop here, and we're gonna go through a pretty budget Teysa Karlov deck. I do like playing Orzhov colors, which is black and white, and this has been a really fun deck. And I'm gonna take you through this pretty budget list. The total of the deck comes out to about under $50 Canadian, so it's pretty affordable. And we'll go through it one by one. But if you don't know Teysa Karlov, she is 2 and Orzhov and she is a 2/4 human advisor. And if a creature dying causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. So essentially, double death triggers. Um, and she also has the subtext creature tokens you control have vigilance and lifelink. That's not, from my experience, it's not as relevant. It can come into play in moments, but normally you're playing this commander for creature deaths triggering your permanents twice. Um, just for flavor, while Kaya is Guildmaster, Teysa waits patiently at the center of the Orzhov Web of Power. So really interesting cards, really interesting commander. I have a lot of fun playing this. It's not a very combat focused deck. It's more played as combo, as far as I'm concerned. There's a lot of good synergies with death triggers, and we'll go through them as we go through. We'll quickly talk about the land base. This is a pretty simple land base. If you want to go non-budget, there are things you can put in here like the black white shocks and fetches, etc. However, as far as I'm concerned, you can pretty much run plains and swamps. A few things you might want to get in: command tower. Obviously, being able to produce black or white is good. Evolving wilds just to grab. If you have a few swamps in your hand and you need that white source, this is a pretty budget land. Orzhov Basilica taps for black white. It is a bounce. You have your plains, your swamps. Tainted Field here is a taps for colorless, but it taps for black or white if you control a swamp, which you probably will. Enters the battlefield tapped as a scry land, and another kind of fetch. And I skipped over High Market because this land is here strictly for the utility in this deck. This deck does rely on a lot of sacrifice outlets. You want your creatures to die, and more often than not, your opponents are not going to do that for you. So sacrifice outlets are really good in this deck. So High Market acts as a sacrifice outlet, and it is tutorable with some of these lands. I believe. Um, no, maybe there's an expedition map in this particular build. No, there isn't. But anyways, High Market can be tutorable. So having a copy of it in your deck, just to get another sacrifice outlet, is good. We'll go to artifacts next. It's pretty typical. I only run 7 here. We have our Soul Ring, obligatory Soul Ring. It's just too good not to include in any deck. Charcoal Diamond, which just taps for black. It's a 2 mana rock, taps for black. Mind Stone, this is just a little bit more ramp, and you can pay 1 and sack it to draw a card. Pay 1, tap, and sack to draw a card. Orzhov Signet, just filtering. Talisman of Hierarchy, a little ramp and fixing. Commander Sphere, although you don't necessarily have to run it, but I have a copy of it, so it just made sense. And if anything, it's a 3 mana draw 1. And then you have Orzhov Locket, which is 3 to cast and in a white black. This could be a cut as well. It does have a pay 4 and pay either Orzhov color 4 times and tap sack it to draw 2. Not the most impressive card, but it's in the deck. So that's the artifacts. Now we're going to talk a little bit about some of the enchantments. Um, so Vampiric Rites, this is an enchantment you can pay black for, sits on the battlefield, and then for 1 black you can sacrifice a creature, you gain 1 life and draw a card. Even if this was 1 black sacrifice a creature, um, and gain 1 life, or 1 black sacrifice a creature, draw a card, or even 1 black sacrifice a creature and do nothing. This does act like a sack outlet for your deck, which is extremely important. you do get the benefit of drawing a card. Now, an effect like this, paying 1 black and sacrificing the creature is a cost for this card. So if Teysa is out, you're not going to gain 2 life and draw two cards, not off this Vampiric Rites. However, if the creature has a death trigger, that will double up once you sacrifice it, because sacrificing a creature does count as the creature dying. We have Hidden Stockpile. This is a Orzhov to cast. It has Revolt at the beginning of your end step. If a permanent you control left the battlefield this turn, create a 1/1 colorless artifact creature token. But it also has pay 1, sacrifice a creature, scry 1, so this can act like another sack outlet. You have Agent of the Iron Throne, which is the commander background. I don't play this currently, but it's an interesting pickup. I do plan on picking this up and trying it. Basically, it adds when an artifact or creature you control is put into the graveyard from the battlefield, each opponent loses 1 life to Teysa. So Teysa doubling death triggers on her own and giving creatures vigilance and lifelink. She can't operate on her own. She needs a whole bunch of other stuff to kind of play off her triggers. But with this card, when creatures are dying, if you have Teysa out, you do get to ping each opponent for 1. Blightmound. 2 and a black. Attacking pests you control have +1/+0 and have menace. And whenever a non-token creature you control dies, create a 1/1 black and green pest creature token with when this creature dies, you gain 1 life. Now, here's where Teysa triggers come in. This is a permanent, and one of your non-token creatures dying will cause the 1/1 black and green pest creature to be created. So this will be doubled by Teysa's ability. So if you have Teysa on the field and a non-token creature dies, you get to create 2 1/1 black and green pests with when this creature dies, you gain 1 life. We have Field of Souls. When a non-token creature is put into the graveyard from the battlefield, create a 1/1 white spirit creature token with flying. I believe there was errata around this language. Put into the graveyard is considered dying, so this will trigger twice if Teysa is on the battlefield. And this is a card I haven't been too impressed with so far. It's 3 black black, and whenever a non-token creature you control dies, create a 2/2 black zombie token. I mean, creating 2/2/2s is not bad. I just haven't found this card to be all that great in the deck. So those are our enchantments, and now we'll go to our spells. So Dark Ritual, pretty common in black decks. It's a little bit of ramp. Pay black, get 3 black. Tragic Slip. This card is decent removal in this deck. For a black, target creature gets 1/1, -1/-1 until end of turn, but it has Morbid. So the creature gets -13/13 until end of turn if a creature died this turn. So often what you'll do is you will use one of your sack outlets or sacrifice effects on a creature to sacrifice a token or to sacrifice a creature, or you can even swing a 1/1 into somebody, and if they block and kill it, you get to, at instant speed, cast Tragic Slip. This hits a lot of commanders. It basically kills anything that can be targeted and is not indestructible, etc. Village Rites. For a black, and as an additional cost to cast a spell, sacrifice a creature, you get to draw 2 cards. So sacrificing creatures is good in this deck. So spells that make us sacrifice a creature as additional cost kind of gives you a stack outlet on a spell. So the nice thing about this is you can pay black, you can sacrifice a creature, you can get those double death triggers, and you also get to draw 2 cards. Go for the Throat, just targeted removal, 1 and a black, destroy target non-artifact creature. We got a few board wipes in here. These are some of the cheaper ones. So Martial Coup. I have found this card to be very, very good in this deck because you can pay 5 for X. You get to create 5 1/1 white soldiers, and then you get to wipe the entirety of the other board. This is also good if you have a board state where all your creatures dying will cause a ton of triggers to just drain people. So this can end games by itself. Well, not by itself, but this can be a finishing card. And worst case scenario, it's just a board wipe to help you restabilize. Rite of Oblivion. This is a great card in this deck. White and a black. As an additional cost to cast a spell, sack a non-land permanent, and you get to exile target non-land permanent. So sacking a creature, you get to take advantage of this as a sack outlet. You get to get double death triggers off that creature or any other permanents that you control that are going to trigger off creature deaths. You get to exile a non-land permanent, and on top of that, this card has flashback. This card is a very good card in this deck. Mortify, 1 in Orzhov, destroy target creature enchantment. Victimize, this is also a decent card. For 2 in a black, you can choose 2 target creatures in your graveyard, sack a creature. If you do, return the chosen cards to the battlefield tapped. This deck has some graveyard shenanigans where you can bring stuff back from the graveyard to sack them to an outlet again to kind of double up on triggers. And you'll see with our creatures why we want to double up on triggers. Vindicate, 1 in Orzhov, destroy target permanent, just more targeted removal. I believe Anguished Unmaking should be in this list, but I think it's a little pricey, so it's not in this budget deck. I do run a single tutor. Diabolic Tutor is pretty cheap, and for 2 and 2 black, you get to search your library for a card and put that into your hand, then shuffle. This can search up some creatures you need. It can search up a board wipe. This card is just decent. Being able to tutor for an answer is just powerful, or being able to tutor for a combo piece is just powerful. Kaya's Wrath, another board wipe. Destroy all creatures. You gain life equal to the number of creatures you control that were destroyed this way for white, white, black, black. Return to Dust, artifact enchantment hate. It can hit 2 if you cast during your main phase. Shadow the Sky. Each player who controls a creature with power 4 or greater draws a card, then destroy all creatures. These are just some cheap board wipes. Now you can replace these with things like Wrath of God, Damnation, Dam, etc. But some of those tend to be a little pricier, so I wanted to keep this one budget. But there's a lot of room to upgrade this deck with better board wipes, better removal, etc. Utter End, 2 Orzhov, exile target non-land permanent, decent. Razakat's Right, search your library for a card, put that card in your hand, then shuffle. There's another tutor, and it has Cycle on it. Hour of Revelation costs 3 more to cast if there are 3 less to cast. If there are 10 or more non-land permanents on the battlefield, destroy all non-land permanents. So this, because we are in Orzhov, there's a lot of wipes, there's a lot of targeted removal. I mean, black and white seem to be the removal colors, so you're going to see a lot of that here. Planar Cleansing, Necromantic Selection. Often I found that other people are developing out their board and they have a lot of creatures on there. And in most cases, a board wipe is beneficial to this deck. Board wipes don't hit this deck as hard because you do get a lot of triggers, and sometimes you're protected from the board wipe because people wiping your board is going to trigger, let's say, Blood Artist a bunch of times. So that's it for the spells. Now let's look at the beef of the deck, and this is why I saved it for last, because we're going to go through the different pieces and some of the combos, etc. There are a few cards that I run in my deck that are not in this budget list because they are like $10 or $15 Canadian. There are 2 to 3 cards I'm going to recommend putting in this deck that are just way too good to exclude, in my opinion. Can you run this deck without them? Yes, but the deck becomes just a little scarier with them. So let's go through the creatures first of all. So one pattern you'll notice is a lot of these token producers. So when this creature dies, create a 1/1 white spirit token. This is a white to cast. It's a 1/1. And the benefit of this is that if you have Teysa on the field, if this creature dies, you get to create 2 1/1 spirits. You'll also notice I'm like Hunted Witness. When it dies, create a white soldier. There are a few cards throughout this deck that have that effect. When it dies, create a token, and you get to double those tokens up using Teysa. So we'll go through one by one and just look through all the creatures and talk about their interaction in the deck and how important they are to the deck. Carrion Feeder. For a black, you get a 1/1 that can't block, and it has a sacrifice a creature, put a 1/1 counter on Carrion Feeder. This card is extremely good in this deck, being a 1/1 creature that benefits from sacrificing a creature. You get to put a 1/1 on it. You're going to be sacrificing creatures, and often you need a sack outlet to do that. This card can act as your sack outlet, and you get the benefit of putting a 1/1 counter on it. Now, with Teysa on the battlefield, this does not get an additional 1/1. It would if it was worded as, when a creature dies, put a 1/1 on this creature. But this acts as a sack outlet for your deck. Doom Traveler, token production. Hunted Witness, token production. Viscera Seer acts as another cheap sack outlet. You get to scry, but really all we care about is being able to sacrifice our creatures at will. Blood Artist. This card is a must in this deck. It's a $2 card, and when I was creating this list, I tried to stay under $1, but this card is just too good to not include in this deck. And basically, whenever Blood Artist or another creature dies, target player loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. Now, with this on the field, this is an infinite combo piece. But even if it's not in the infinite combo, just having this card out and being able to sacrifice your own creatures, you can ping for quite a bit. It can also help sustain you in terms of gaining life. And if you have Teysa out, this triggers twice. So everyone will ping for 1 and you gain 1, and then sorry, not everyone. This target player will ping for 1 and you gain 1. But with Teysa out, you can ping somebody for 2 triggers of 1 and you gain uh, 2 triggers of 1 life gain. Carrier Thrall, 1 and a black. When it dies, you create a 1/1 colorless Eldrazi token. If Taste is out, you get to create 2. And these tokens have sacrifice this creature, add colorless. So this acts as token production. It acts as a little bit of ramp. This is just a good card in this deck. Another one you'll see along this line, it might not be in this list because it's a few dollars, would be Pawn of Ulamog. It does something similar, creates Eldrazi tokens that can sack for mana. Cruel Celebrant, white and a black. Whenever Cruel Celebrant or another creature or planeswalker you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. This card is similar to Blood Artist, except it is creatures you control, whereas Blood Artist is when another creature dies. So Blood Artist will actually trigger off other people's creatures dying, and this will get you double tasted triggers. Cruel Celebrant only triggers off your own creatures, but this pings everybody and not just target player. So slight differences in the cards, but they're both pingers, and you'll see multiple pingers in this deck. One of the win conditions here is going very big on a board in terms of tokens and just sacrificing them to trigger ping effects. Doom Dissenter showed you that before. Create a 2/2 black zombie. If Teysa is out, you get to create 2 of those when this dies. Imperious Oligarch, it's a Vigilance 2/1, and it has Afterlife 1, so when it dies, it creates a 1/1 white and black spirit. You'll see a few Afterlife cards in this deck. Orzhov Enforcer, 1/2 Death Touch for 1 black, and it has Afterlife 1 as well, so it creates a 1/1 white and black spirit token with flying. If Taste is out, you get to create 2 of those. Reassembling Skeleton, this is also a combo piece. This has some recursion, where you can pay 1 and a black to bring it back from your graveyard. So oftentimes you'll play Reassembling Skeleton, it'll die or you'll sacrifice it to trigger some of your enchantments, etc. And then on a previous turn or on the same turn, subsequent turn or on the same turn, you can pay 1 and a black to return it and then sack it again, return it and sack it again. So this can work for, let's say, creating Blightmount triggers or Field of Souls triggers. You can also sack it to Carrion Feeder to put a 1/1 on Carrion Feeder, bring the Reassembly Skeleton back to the field and sacrifice it again to put more counters on Carrion Feeder. So this is a very, very good card in this deck. I would not suggest cutting it. It just gives you too many options. It gives you sacrifice fodder, and it's just good with the graveyard recursion. Zulaport Cutthroat, another ping effect. Not going to spend too much time on that, but basically when it or another creature you control dies, you ping everyone for 1 and you gain 1. This card and Cruel Celebrant are just threats, and they will be targeted for removal pretty quickly. Burnished Heart, this is just a bit of ramp. There's nothing really special about it. It's a bit of ramp. You get to pay 3 and sack it to search up to 2 basic land cards. There's a lot of 2 to 3 white spells in here, so you see 3 white, 3 white. So making sure you have enough planes on the field is pretty important in this deck. So this just helps us achieve that. Most often I search for 2 planes, but depending on the board state, you might go swamp planes or Double Swamp I barely have to do. Fleshbag Marauder. Now this is a fun card. When it enters the battlefield, each player sacrifices a creature. You can play Fleshbag Marauder, and then you can sacrifice it to itself. So you don't have to, let's say you have a really big creature on the board and you want to play Fleshbag, you don't have to sacrifice that other creature. You can have Fleshbag enter, and then you can pick which creature to sacrifice. So you can just have Fleshbag Marauder hit your graveyard. There are some loops in this deck, some small loops where you can have Fleshbag Marauder hit the graveyard, and then you can play something like, where was it? There's a few recursion spells. I forgot where they were, but Vampiric Rites? No. I don't remember, but there are some spells here that bring cards back from the graveyard onto the field. So bringing back a Fleshbag Marauder, or even you'll see one of the cards I'll recommend is Liesa, which is a awesome angel. And if a creature would die, instead of it going to your graveyard, it just kind of hangs out, and at your end step, it goes back to your hand. So with Liesa and Fleshbag, you can actually kind of loop. Grim Haruspex. This is a really good card in this deck. Whenever another non-token creature you control dies, draw a card. You can have this out, sacrifice a reassembling skeleton to one of your sack outlets, draw 2 cards if you have Teysa out, and then continue that loop to fill your hand. Good card in this deck. Hallowed Spirit Keeper. This card has done work. It is 1 white white, and when it dies, you create X 1/1 white spirit creature tokens with flying, where X is the number of creature cards in your graveyard. More often than not, this deck will have anywhere from 3 to 8 creatures in the graveyard, and with Teysa out, this trigger doubles up. So I've seen this card create uh, 20 spirit tokens. I've seen it create quite a bit. So this is a really decent card in this deck. Midnight Reaper. This is another really good card in this deck. Whenever a non-token creature you control dies, Midnight Reaper deals 1 damage to you and you draw a card. The 1 damage is usually not relevant. You have enough life gain here to offset it. But with Teysa out, this doubles up. So you take 2, you draw 2. And you can control that usually with your sacrifice outlets or things like that. Ministrant of Obligation. 2 and a white. Afterlife 2. When it dies, you create 2 1/1s. Black white spirit creature tokens with flying. With Teysa out, this creates 4 1/1s, so this is just value. And then you can sacrifice those 1/1s. So a lot of what this deck does is produce a lot of tokens and use those tokens as sacrifice fodder with Teysa out to double trigger a lot of these other permanents. Falconwrath Noble, really good in this deck. Similar to Blood Artist, but it's 3 and a black. Whenever Falconwrath Noble or another creature dies, target player loses 1 life, and you gain 1 life. This is a way to ping people down, and it's a fun card. Seraph of the Scales, 2 and an Orzhov, flying, 4/3. You can pay white to give it Vigilance until end of turn. You can pay black to give it Death Touch, and when it dies, it has Afterlife 2. I haven't been too impressed with this card. I think it's more so filler. I think there are better cards in this slot. However, in a budget position, it's not a bad card. Sifter of Skulls. 3 and a black. Devoid, it has no color. Whenever another non-token creature you control dies, put a 1/1 colorless Eldrazi with sack it, add colorless to your mana pool. Once again, with Teysa out, this gets doubled up. And this can be value. You can sack your reassembling skeleton, put 2 on 1 Eldrazi's out, bring the reassembling skeleton back, sack them again, and now you have 4 creatures that you can sack for 4 mana, which is pretty decent. Smothering Abomination. I find this card to be a little clunky at times. It's a 4/3 flyer, which is a decent body, and 4/3 flying is nothing to be scoffed at. But it has at the beginning of your upkeep sacrifice a creature, and whenever you sacrifice a creature, draw a card. At 4 mana, I would prefer this to cost a little less, and I don't really care about the 4/3 flying body. This card feels clunky to me. Um, it's decent. It gives you quite a bit of value, but there are times where this is in hand, and you're like, At worst, you play this out, it maybe survives around, and then on your upkeep you sacrifice itself, and you get to draw a card. It is a sack outlet, so it does enable you to sack stuff if you have no other sack outlet. But I'm not sure how I feel about this card. I have to play it a little more, but you know, it's all right. Oh, excuse me, had some tacos today. Um, Sad Robot, Solemn Simulacrum. Just a decent card, just decent value. When it enters the battlefield, search for a basic, put it in the battlefield tapped, and then when it dies, you draw a card. With Teysa out, you get to draw 2 cards, and in Commander, getting to draw cards is almost as important as ramping, in my opinion, because you can have all the mana in the world, but if you have nothing to do with it, what good is it? So being able to draw cards and fill your hand, this card just does that fantastically if you have a Teysa out. Vindictive Vampire. When another creature you control dies, Vindictive Vampire deals 1 damage to each opponent and you gain 1 life. Once again, another pinger. Whisper, Blood Liturgist. Not sure how I feel about Whisper. Sacrifice tap and sacrifice 2 creatures. Return target creature from your graveyard to the battlefield. I find this card to be the fact that you have to tap it. Usually when you play this, it becomes a target for removal extremely quickly. It does work as a sack outlet, but you have to wait to tap it. And it can return you a pretty important creature card from the graveyard to the battlefield. Now this is a budget list, so we don't have something like Shield Dread. We're not running things like Pitiless Plunder, etc. But um, if we were, I mean, this has some pretty decent targets. What is it? There's that dragon that when it dies, deal 5 damage to each opponent. So there can be some pretty decent targets for this. However, in this particular budget list, this is a card I'd possibly look to cut, just because being budget, there's not a lot you get back here. Grabbing back one of your pingers is probably the best bet, like grabbing a Blood Artist, etc. Or even a Flesh Bag to just trigger another round of sacrifices might work, but not too huge on this card personally. Revelark. This is a decent card. So for 4 and a white, you get a flyer that has when it leaves the battlefield, return 2 creature cards with power 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. Now, normally you're not going to cast it for 5. You're going to cast it for 6, which is the evoke cost. So for 5 and a white, you get to play Revelark. It hits the battlefield if it's not countered. It leaves the battlefield immediately, or it gets sacrificed, which is important because that sacrifice is a death trigger and will trigger your other permanents that look for creature death. So usually you get the evoke cost, and when it leaves the battlefield, you can return 2 target creature cards with power 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. So this can pull out very important cards from your graveyard to the battlefield. Zulaport Cutthroat, Blood Artist, etc. So definitely a good card to have in this deck. Delice, Reverent Medium, 3 white black. At the beginning of each end step, create X 1/1 white spirit tokens with flying, where X is the number of tokens you created this turn. There's some pretty good synergies between this and something like a Hallowed Spirit Keeper. There's good synergies with this and any of the Afterlife 1, 2 cards, etc. There's really good synergy with this and Pitiless Plunderer, which is not in this list. It's like a $15 card. But this doesn't care about creature tokens. It cares about number of tokens you created this turn. So if you're creating creature tokens, if you're creating artifact tokens, if you're creating treasure tokens, treasure tokens, blood tokens, etc., this card cares about those. So normally you do a bunch of shenanigans and you would play this on main phase 2 or post-combat main phase, and you end up with a board of like 20 spirits, which just gives you intense sacrifice fodder. If everyone's less than 20 and you have a sack outlet, you create 20 spirits, you sack them to your sack outlet, you have a pinger on board, everybody pings down. Really decent card. Harvester of Souls, 4 black black, it's a 5/5 death touch. Whenever another non-token creature dies, you may draw a card. This card's okay. This might be on my cut list. A 5/5 death touch is good. It can hold down your board and kind of stop some of the bigger creatures from coming at you, which isn't bad. And when a non-token creature dies, you may draw a card. With Teysa out, you get to double that. It's a decent card, but this is one that I might look to cut. Requiem Angel. Whenever another non-spirit creature you control dies, put a 1/1 white spirit creature token with flying onto the battlefield. If you're doing some sacrifice effects or reassembling skeleton, etc., this is just token production and it's fantastic. Sun Titan comes in. When it enters the battlefield, return target permanent card with mana value 3 or less from graveyard to the battlefield. This will get your pingers. This will get your afterlife cards. There's a lot of targets for this. You can kind of loop with Sun Titan Fleshbag Marauder, so you can play a Fleshbag Marauder, have everyone sack a creature. Then you can play a Sun Titan, play a Fleshbag Marauder. Everyone sacks a creature. You sacrifice the Fleshbag Marauder, and then on your next turn, or if you have enough mana, you can play a Sun Titan, bring the Fleshbag Marauder back to the battlefield. One more round of sacrifice triggers. Put the Fleshbag Marauder back in the graveyard, and then when Sun Titan attacks next turn, you can do that all again. So Sun Titan plus Fleshbag Marauder is a fun combo. I do enjoy that. And then we have this boy, this card is devastating. If this card comes out, it will be targeted for removal. So you have to be careful that you're not just going to slam this you're not just going to slam this 7-drop and have it remove the same turn. Normally, you want to have more than 7 mana because you do want to be able to use some of your sacrifice outlets if they cost mana, etc. But if you do get this down on board and you start sacrificing creatures, whenever Butcher Malakir or another creature you control dies, each opponent sacrifices a creature. This does get doubled up with Teysa. So there are times where you could have bring him in, sacrifice a spirit token to your Carrion Feeder. That will trigger 2 of these triggers, or 2 of these effects. Everyone sacking 2 creatures. Sacrifice another spirit to Carrion Feeder. Everyone sacking another 2 creatures. This can act as a pseudo board wipe, and this card does end games, so very good card to have in the deck. So anyways, that's it for the budget list. It's a really fun deck to play. It plays that aristocratic style, drain and gain, sacrifice creatures, etc. There are a few cards that I'm going to quickly look up for y'all that I suggest adding to this deck, and we'll just kind of look through them right now. The first one being Pitiless Plunderer. Pitiless Plunder is 3 and a black. It does cost a little bit, so it is about a $12 to $15 card. But whenever another creature you control dies, create a treasure token. So if you have Teysa out, this will create you 2 treasure tokens. And treasure tokens can be sacrificed to add a mana of any color, which is amazing. Another suggestion for this deck would be Ashnod's Altar. If we can get it to load, Ashnod's Altar is a sacrifice outlet. It costs about $10 to $15, and if you sacrifice a creature, add 2 colorless to your mana pool. Now, these 2 cards are part of an infinite combo. There's a 4-card infinite you can put in this deck that works fairly well. And essentially it depends on Ashnod's and Pitiless Plunder are 2 of the main pieces. So when you sacrifice a creature to Ashnod's, you're going to add 2 colorless. And then if you have a black mana from a Pitiless Plunderer token, you have 2 colorless and a black. You can use 1 colorless and a black to bring back Reassembling Skeleton. So Ashnod's Altar, Pitiless Plunderer, Reassembling Skeleton, and then a sacrifice outlet. Not a sacrifice outlet, a pinger like Blood Artist, etc. And you go infinite because you sacrifice Reassembling Skeleton to Ashnod's Altar. That'll add 2 colorless mana. It'll create you 2 treasure tokens, or 1 treasure token if you don't have Teysa out. So this combo does not depend on Teysa being out. And what ends up happening is every time your Reassembling Skeleton dies, you ping everybody for 1 and you gain 1, or you ping target player for 1 and you gain 1, and then you pay the 1 colorless that you floated from the 2 colorless from Ashnod's, and you sacrifice a treasure token for a black, and you get to bring Reassembling Skeleton back onto the battlefield tapped. Then you sacrifice it to Ashnod's again, you get 2 mana, you get a treasure token from Pitiless Plunderer, you sacrifice that Pitiless Plunderer token for black, you use some of the mana from Ashnod's to bring back Reassembling Skeleton, and you do it over and over and over, and you go infinite with this. It's infinite ping. I do suggest putting this combo in your deck. It is a 4 card combo, and though this budget list runs 1 tutor, you need time to assemble the combo. I've seen the combo go off as early as maybe turn 5 or 6, but in a normal game, it's usually going off on turn 8, 9, 10. When you're kind of way into the game, everybody's already at like 15, 20 life. Um, you've been playing for 45 minutes to an hour, and then you get the combo off. So personally, when you come to a table with this deck, if you do have that infinite, I usually just say, hey, just so everybody knows, I have one infinite in here. It's a 4 card combo. I play 1 tutor. It doesn't come out very fast. And I have won games with the infinite, but you can also win games with just grinding out those pings. Um, Another card I suggest putting in this deck would be there's 2 other ones that I think should be in this deck, but they do cost a little more, and that is Liesa, Forgotten Archangel, 2 white, white, black, flying lifelink, 4/5. Whenever another non-token creature you control dies, return that card to its owner's hand at the beginning of the next end step. If a creature an opponent controls would die, exile it instead. So this is twofold. Um, this basically hoses some graveyard shenanigans on your opponent's side, but on your side, this has some interesting effects where with the Liesa out, you can play Fleshbag Marauder, you can sacrifice it to itself, and at the end step, it goes back to your hand. So you can kind of loop some creatures here with Liesa. It's a really interesting card. One thing you can do is you can also have Liesa on the battlefield, use a sack outlet to trigger some of your afterlife stuff or to trigger some of your creatures, and then Liesa comes back. Liesa will put those cards back in your hand at end step. So this is just value from this card. Another card I would suggest including would be Teysa Orzhov Scion. She is 1 in Orzhov. Sacrifice 3 white creatures, remove target creature from the game. Whenever another black creature you control is put into the graveyard from play, put a 1/1 white spirit creature with token with flying into play. This is just sack 3 creatures. It's a sack outlet. It gives you triggers on any of your dying effects. So, if those creatures have like afterlife, etc., you're going to have those trigger because they are dying to the sacrifice. And you get to remove a target creature from the game. So that's pretty decent. And on top of it, if a black creature you control is put into the graveyard from play, put a 1/1 white spirit. So you do get a lot of recursion from this. And oh, there's another card here, Alenda the Dust Rose. So with Teysa, Alenda, you do see a lot of recursion. This is an $8 card. And this card is just a beast. I have been so impressed with this card in this deck. This card is just straight value. It's a 1/1 lifelink for 4, 2 in an Orzhov. And whenever another creature dies, put a 1/1 counter on Alenda. So if you have Teysa out, a creature dying will put 2/1s, 2/1 counters on her. And if you think about it, this is not another creature token, so you can sacrifice a bunch of the spirits you've been creating to pump Alenda. I've seen a 20/20 Alenda, 30/30. If people don't deal with her, she is an issue. Now, if people do deal with her, if they kill her or they target her, you sacrifice her to a sack outlet or you let her die because when Alenda dies, you create X 1/1 white vampire creature tokens with lifelink, where X is Alenda's power. So if you imagine a 20/20 Alenda or a 15/15 Alenda, when she dies, you're creating 15 1/1s, and this helps you with a go wide strategy. But if you have Teysa out, her dying would create 30 1/1s in that case because this trigger does get affected, or Teysa does see this trigger and double it up. This card is a powerhouse in the deck, and if you have the money to include this and Ashnod's Altar and Pitiless Plunder, the deck just gets that much better. I would say this is a must if you can afford it. This card just adds so much power to this deck, and being able to create 20, 30 1/1s. If you think about having a sack outlet out and one pinger, sacrificing 30 spirit tokens to a sack outlet and hitting everybody for 1, or 2 if Teysa is out, that ends games. So this is another win con. Some of the win cons in this deck would be that infinite combo. It would be a go wide token strategy. It could be a Lenda with a sacrifice and pinger. This deck is pretty versatile, and I've honestly had a lot of fun playing it. I do plan on playing some Spell Table, recording some games. So if you enjoyed this deck tech and you liked watching it, and you plan on putting a Teysa together, or even if you have some suggestions for cards that I missed, obviously there's EDH Rec as well. So if we go EDH Rec Teysa, have a look at some of these cards. There are some cool synergies here. Oh, Braids. Braids is a fun one in this deck. Have a look at that. Pawn of Ulamog. There's some pretty decent cards. Bastion of Remembrance, etc. I did cut some of those because they're more expensive, and this is a budget build. Skull Clamp is fantastic in this deck. Uh, Skull Clamp is basically a one mana draw four most of the time. So you play it for one, and then you equip it to a token creature, and that creature dies, and you get to draw two. But with Teysa out, you get to draw four. Really decent. You have other targeted removal, Swords to Plowshares. Dictate of Erebos is a fantastic card as well. It basically acts like a Butcher of Malakir. When a creature you control dies, each opponent sacrifices a creature. And there are just some really fun synergies and really fun cards in this deck. Yeheni as well. Um, so the version I'm showing you is very budget. It is meant to be like base level playable. But with some of those upgrades and some of the cards like Junji, Liesa, Body Launderer is good. Kakusho is fantastic in this deck, getting the double death triggers. Basically, that's 10 life ping from everybody if Tace is out. Archon of Justice is a fun card. I don't know if that was on that list, but basically when it dies, exile target permanent. If Tace is out, you can exile two permanents. Fantastic card. Um, there is another infinite here, I believe, with Karmic Guide and something else, but I don't like two card infinites. I don't play them. But yeah, you can look through, and the nice thing about this list here is that it's really budget, it's really cheap, and there's a lot of room for expanding this deck over time. If y'all are interested in an upgrade guide and want to talk about some of those cards, please leave a comment below. If you have some cards that you absolutely think is a powerhouse in this deck, please let me know. And yeah, I hope y'all enjoyed the video and this intro to in this deck tech to Teysa Karlov. Super fun commander. Highly recommend you play her. Anyways, thanks all. See ya.